remember the exact weight of the coffee cup. 12 ounces. Paper with a lid that wasn't properly sealed. I remember because I'd been clutching it for 23 minutes, standing in that line, rehearsing what I would say when I finally reached her. Nothing elaborate. Just nice to meet you. Or thank you for the welcome speech. Something normal. Something that would make me forgettable. That was the whole point of coming here. A new city, a new school, a new chance to be no one in particular. I had spent 4 years of high school perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible. Gray cardigans. Hair pulled back. Eyes that never quite met anyone's. When I got the acceptance letter from Ashworth University, Ivy League old money, the kind of place where legacy students outnumbered scholarship kids 3-1, I told myself this was the ultimate test. Could I vanish in plain sight, surrounded by the most ambitious people in the country? I had been here exactly 6 days. So far the answer was yes. The chapel was Gothic in the way only old institutions can afford. Vaulted ceilings that seemed to swallow sound, stained glass windows throwing fractured blue and crimson across the marble floor. The brass chandeliers had probably witnessed a century of freshmen trembling in their new blazers, clutching their parents' hands or their own sweaty palms. I stood near the back of the queue with 97 other students, my navy blazer chosen specifically because it absorbed light rather than reflected it. My shoes were plain black flats that made no sound on the stone. My glasses were wire-framed and unremarkable. I had practiced my posture in the mirror, shoulders slightly curved inward, chin tilted down, the posture of someone who didn't expect to be addressed. The welcome speech had ended 15 minutes ago. Now came the ritual, the receiving line. Every freshman filed past the podium to shake hands with the student council president, the golden girl whose portrait already hung in the east corridor alongside her father's and her grandfather's. I had seen her photo in the admissions brochure. The same sharp cheekbones. The same unsmiling composure. The same eyes that seemed to be looking through the camera at something just beyond the frame. I watched Sloane shake hands from my place in line. She didn't use both hands like the other administrators. She extended her right arm straight, fingers pointing slightly downward, and met each palm with a crisp, efficient tap, like signing a document or stamping a form. Her smile was rehearsed but not fake. It was simply managed. A smile that said, I am here because I am supposed to be, and I will perform this correctly. Her blazer was white, tailored to her frame, the fabric so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Her hair was pulled into a low bun so tight it must have hurt. Gold-rimmed glasses. No jewelry except a thin chain around her neck that disappeared beneath her collar. When the boy in front of me, a tall, loud sophomore who kept trying to pitch his Model UN application, shook her hand, Sloane's gaze slid past his shoulder. She scanned the remaining line. One face after another. Quick mechanical sweep, the sort of assessment you make when you're counting heads and checking names. Then her eyes landed on me. I swear I only shifted my weight to adjust my backpack strap. But her focus stopped, half a second longer than it had on anyone else. Maybe a full second. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, like she was trying to place a face she'd seen somewhere before. Then she blinked and looked away, glancing at her watch. She's counting, I thought. She's bored. She wants this over with. That was my first mistake. When my turn came, I switched the coffee cup from my right hand to my left so I could offer my right for the handshake. I had rehearsed this too, cup in the left hand so the right was free and dry. But I had forgotten that the lid on the paper cup was loose. I'd nudged it open while fidgeting in line, worrying at the plastic rim with my thumb. As I extended my right arm, my shoulder rotated and the coffee performed a slow, graceful arc. Spilled across the crisp white front of her tailored blazer, exactly over her left breast. The sound was not a splash. It was a soft plop, like a small animal falling into water. Then silence. Kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes every heartbeat audible. Someone behind me inhaled sharply, maybe me. I heard a murmur ripple through the line, the electric buzz of people who had just witnessed something they would recount at dinner. Did you see that girl? The one who spilled coffee on Sloane Ashworth? Her face went white. Sloane looked down. The brown stain spread in an irregular shape across the white fabric, soaking in fast like water into sand. It was ugly. Ruinous. A stain that would never fully come out of that kind of material. Her expression did not change. No frown, no flinch, no sharp intake of breath. She simply observed it as if it were a slide under a microscope, a specimen she needed to classify. Then she raised her eyes to mine. Her lips moved. The shape was not a smile, not a grimace, not anything I could categorize. It was something else, the look of a person who finds an unfamiliar object in her room and doesn't immediately throw it away, but stops and wonders, "How did you get in here?" She said, "I'll remember you." Her voice was light. People behind me probably did not hear it. The sound of her words was barely above a whisper, a private channel opened between the two of us. But what made my spine turn cold was not the words themselves. It was what she did next. She looked down at the stain again, and with her thumb, very quickly, almost imperceptibly, she traced the edge of it. A single stroke, drawing its outline, mapping its borders, committing it to memory. She's calculating the cost, I thought. She's going to bill my department for dry cleaning. She's going to make my life a living hell. She's going to remember my face and my name and my student ID, and she will find a way to make me pay. That was my second mistake. I mumbled something. I don't remember what. An apology, probably, though the words came out garbled, swallowed by the pounding in my ears. I backed away from the podium, nearly tripping over my own feet. The girl behind me stepped forward to take my place, and I was forgotten, just another freshman in a navy blazer, just another face in the crowd. But I felt her gaze on my back as I retreated to the exit. A pressure, like a hand between my shoulder blades, guiding me out the door. That night I wrote a 1,000-word apology email. I revised it 7 times. First draft was groveling and hysterical. The second was overly formal, as if I were writing to a corporate executive. The third tried to make a joke, "I hope your blazer has insurance," but I deleted that immediately. The fourth was too long. The fifth was too short. The sixth mentioned my scholarship, a detail I immediately regretted. It sounded like I was trying to guilt her into forgiveness. The seventh struck a balance of sincere contrition and professional distance, and at 2:07 a.m. I hit send. I lay in my dorm bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone clutched to my chest. My roommate, a pre-med student named Priya, had gone home for the weekend. The room was silent except for the radiator's intermittent hiss. I counted the ceiling tiles. I recited the periodic table to myself, a nervous habit from high school. I did not sleep. Her reply arrived at 3:17 a.m. No subject line. No salutation. No sign-off. One attachment. I opened it. A PDF. 4 pages. Page 1, my comparative literature syllabus, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 in Weiler Hall, room 301. Professor Murakami, office hours Wednesday afternoons. Page 2, narrative theory, Wednesdays at 2 in the same building, different room. Page 3, creative writing workshop, Fridays at 3. That seminar was not listed on the public schedule. Only admitted students received the private link after a competitive application process. I had been notified by email separately a week before move-in day. Page 4, yoga class. Mondays at 5:30 p.m., third floor of the fitness center. I had registered with my student ID number, a string of digits that was theoretically accessible only to the recreation database and the bursar's office. Class was listed as intermediate flow, and I had signed up using a pseudonym for the online form. A pseudonym. I had used a pseudonym. No body text. No, here is a reminder of your schedule since you seem so disorganized. No, this is what happens when you embarrass me in front of the faculty. Just 4 pages of formatted information, precise and complete. I stared at the attachment for a long time. The screen glowed in the darkness of my room, illuminating my face. I scrolled up, looking for a 5th page. There wasn't one. I checked the file properties, created 3:14 a.m., modified 3:15 a.m. She had put this together in 3 minutes. She had known where I would be every day, every hour before I had even finished unpacking my boxes. I did not delete the email. I dragged it into a folder labeled miscellaneous. And I started. That was my 3rd mistake. The one I would not admit to myself for weeks. Chapter 2, Access Trespass. 2 weeks later, I received a campus-wide notification in my inbox. Subject line, Student Council Presidential Assistant Appointment. The body read, "Congratulations. You have been selected to serve as the Presidential Assistant for the Ashworth University Student Council for the current academic term. Please report to the Council offices, Administration Building, 5th floor, on Monday at 9 a.m. for orientation." I had not applied. I read the email 4 times. I checked the sender, no reply at council.ashworth.edu. I checked the recipient list, my name alone, no CCs. I checked the date to make sure it wasn't April. Then I picked up my phone and called the student council office. The line rang 7 times before going to voicemail. A recording of a chipper voice said, "Thanks for reaching out. We're currently assisting other students. Leave a message and we'll get back to you within 48 hours. I did not leave a message. Instead, I put on my gray cardigan, the most invisible piece of clothing I owned, and walked to the administration building. The walk took 12 minutes. I counted. Every step felt heavier than the last. The 5th floor hallway was carpeted in a muted beige, the walls adorned with framed photographs of past student councils dating back to 1947. I recognized her grandfather in one of them, the same sharp cheekbones, the same unsmiling composure, standing stiffly beside a row of other young men in bow ties. Her father was in a later photograph, from the 80s, his hair feathered, his smile tight. And there she was, front and center of the current year's portrait, flanked by vice presidents and secretaries who looked slightly afraid of her. The office door was frosted glass, opaque, with gold lettering, Presidential Suite. I knocked. "Come in." Her voice was flat, clinical, the same tone from the receiving line. I pushed open the door. The office was a cube of glass walls, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, facing the campus courtyard and the distant spires of the chapel. The remaining 2 walls were white, unadorned except for a single black and white photograph of a coastline I didn't recognize. Her desk was black, minimalist, holding nothing except a laptop, a single porcelain cup, and a silver pen. No paper. No clutter. The room smelled of cedar, sharp, cold, unmistakable. I had caught that scent on her during the handshake, and now it filled the space like an invisible presence. She sat behind the desk, her glasses perched on her nose, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen. She did not look up when I entered. Her blazer today was charcoal, her hair in the same tight bun, her collar high. She typed something, a quick, decisive burst of keystrokes, and then stopped. "Your first task," she said, "is to reorganize the council's digital archives. Every file from the last 5 years. By date, then by committee, then by priority. Current system is a mess. I stood in the doorway, my hands still on the handle. I didn't apply for this. I know. She typed another few characters. I nominated you. Why? She stopped typing. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system, a low drone that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Then she swiveled her chair and faced me fully. Her eyes, behind the gold-rimmed frames, were unreadable. Not cold, not exactly, but assessing. Like she was reading a text she had already memorized. "Because you spilled coffee on me," she said. And I meant what I said. "I remember you." Her voice was steady, unhurried. She was not angry. She was not amused. She was simply stating a fact. "That's not a reason," I said. That's barely even an explanation. It's the only explanation you're going to get." She folded her hands on the desk. "But if you want a more practical one, I need an assistant who's observant, detail-oriented, and capable of working without constant supervision. You wrote your application essay on the psychology of invisibility. You know how to read a room, how to notice what other people miss. You might be the most observant person in your year." I blinked. "You read my application?" "I read all the applications. I read 3,842 of them." She tilted her head. "Yours was the only one that made me stop." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask what exactly she had found so compelling about my essay on blending into backgrounds. But something in her gaze made me swallow the question. There was a weight to the way she looked at me, not hostile, not warm, but focused. Like I was a puzzle piece she was still trying to fit into a larger image. "Take the job, Iris," she said. "It pays. Looks good on your transcript. And I promise you won't have to speak in public." I took the job. Not because I wanted to, but because refusing would have required an explanation, and explanations demand attention. Attention was the one currency I could not afford to spend. 3 weeks into the position, I found the scrapbook. I had been tasked with scanning old membership forms, boxes and boxes of them, dating back to the early 2000s, all of them yellowed and crinkled and smelling of musty paper. Council office had a storage closet behind the main room, and I had been working my way through it for 2 afternoons, my fingers stained with dust, my allergies flaring. The scrapbook was on the bottom shelf, wedged between a leather-bound copy of Paradise Lost and a stack of council minutes from 2016. The spine caught my eye. It was not archival cloth, not the standard binding used for official records. It was handmade, the sort of thick, textured paper that artists use for sketchbooks. Cover was plain, unmarked, dark blue. I pulled it out. Inside, the first page held a rectangle of white fabric, cut from something, a sharp-edged square of material. It was stained brown, the stains spread irregularly across the weave. Below it, in neat black ink, a date, September 4th. And a single word, written with the same precise hand, variable. My hands started to shake. I turned the page. Clippings from my high school newspaper, 3 essays I had published in my junior and senior years. One was about the nature of urban loneliness. One was about the poetry of Emily Dickinson and the architecture of isolation. One was about leaving home for the first time. Each was annotated in the same black ink, with underlines and marginal notes in tight, controlled handwriting. First hint of rebellion next to a line about escaping a small town. Foreshadows her fear of crowds beside a description of a school assembly I had always hated. This is the one that breaks her open next to a paragraph about losing a childhood friend. Another page, my summer job schedule from the campus library. I had never told her where I worked. I had never mentioned the library at all, not even in passing. But here was the weekly roster, printed out from the student employment portal with my shifts circled in red. Saturday mornings, Wednesday evenings, Monday afternoons. Another page, a photograph of me from freshman orientation standing alone by the fountain in the main quad, looking at my phone. I did not remember anyone taking that picture. The angle was from a distance, slightly elevated as if taken from a second-story window. I was wearing the same navy blazer. My hair was the same pulled-back style. I looked small in the frame, a tiny figure against the stone. Another page, a receipt from the campus bookstore. I had bought a used copy of Jane Eyre on September 12th. The receipt was folded and taped to the page. Another page, a screenshot of the starred email. My email. The one with the PDF attachment of my schedule. She had taken a screenshot of the file in my own inbox, which meant she had access to my student email account. Which meant she had been reading my correspondence for weeks. I heard the glass door slide open behind me. You weren't supposed to find that yet. Sloane's voice was calm, unhurried, as if she were commenting on the weather. She walked past me to her desk, set down her coffee, black, no sugar in the same porcelain cup, and took a slow seat in her chair. She did not look at the scrapbook in my hands. She stared straight ahead at the wall. Is this? My voice cracked. I swallowed and tried again. Are you stalking me? She removed her glasses. Without them, her eyes looked larger, more exposed, the faint shadows beneath them suddenly visible. She set the frames on the desk and met my gaze directly. Tracking would imply I'm following a pattern, she said. I'm not. I'm curating. That's the same thing. No. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk. I don't follow you, Iris. I don't need to. I know you. There's a difference. I stared at her. The cedar scent was stronger today, filling the space between us like a wall. You know that you take your coffee with oat milk, but you pretend to like it because you're too polite to ask for soy, she continued. I know you take the stairs instead of the elevator because you hate being trapped in small spaces with strangers. I know you've never been to a single party since you arrived because you're terrified of being watched. I know you sleep on the left side of your bed because your roommate told me you're afraid of the window. My mouth went dry. My roommate, Priya. Pre-med. She doesn't know she told me anything. But I asked the right questions. She paused. Her voice dropped. And I know that every night you open that starred email and stare at your own schedule, wondering why you haven't deleted it. You don't delete it because some part of you, some small, hidden part, likes knowing that someone is paying attention. I slammed the scrapbook shut. The sound echoed off the glass walls. This is sick, I said. You can't do this. I'll report you. To whom? She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her. It was small, almost sad, a curve of the lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. My family funds this university. My grandfather's name is on the library. The dean is my godmother. You report me, and you become the girl who cried wolf against the golden girl. And more importantly, she stood up and walked around the desk, moving slowly, deliberately. She stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint freckles across her nose, a detail the portraits never captured. You won't report me. 'Cause you've already starred that email. 'Cause you like being seen, Iris. You just don't know how to admit it. I wanted to argue. I wanted to push past her and run out of that room, down the 5 flights of stairs, out into the courtyard, away from that cedar scent and those unblinking eyes. But my feet stayed planted. My hands stayed frozen on the scrapbook cover. She reached out and touched my wrist, a light, almost clinical touch, her fingers cool against my skin. "You're not a victim," she said. "You're a variable. The only one that ever broke my system. And I don't intend to lose you." Chapter 3: Blackout Sanctuary. The Centennial Gala was held in the university's historical museum, a converted mansion on the edge of campus built in 1892, with marble staircases and chandeliers that had survived 3 wars and a fire. The invitation had arrived in my inbox 2 weeks before the event, sent by the council office with the subject line, "Required attendance." I had RSVP'd because it was mandatory and because Sloane had been looking at me with that unreadable expression all week, the one that said she was waiting for something. The night of the gala, I wore a dress I had bought on sale, dark green, simple, the kind of thing that wouldn't draw attention. I had considered wearing black, but I was trying in some small way to prove to myself that I wasn't hiding anymore. The dress was my first step toward visibility, even if no one else would notice. Sloane wore a gown the color of midnight, long and fitted, with a slit that rose to her thigh. Her hair was down for the first time I'd ever seen it, loose waves that fell past her shoulders, softening her face, making her look almost approachable. The gold-rimmed glasses were gone. She had switched to contacts, revealing the full weight of her eyes. She saw me before I saw her. I was standing by the punch bowl, trying to blend into the crowd, when a hand touched my elbow. "You came." I turned. She was closer than I expected, her face inches from mine. "I didn't have a choice," I said. "There's always a choice." She smiled, the sad smile again. "You chose to wear green. That's new." I blinked. "You noticed my dress?" "I notice everything about you." She stepped back, offering her arm. "Come. I want to show you something." The museum's main floor was crowded with faculty, alumni, and students, all of them dressed in their finest. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble, and a string quartet played something classical from the corner. But Sloane led me past the crowd, up a narrow staircase, and into a hallway that was roped off with velvet. "These are the private archives," she said, ducking under the rope. "No one comes up here." "Why are we here?" "Because I wanted to show you the real Ashworth. Not the polished version." She pushed open a door at the end of the hall. "This is where they keep the admissions records from the last century. The ones that show how many students were rejected based on race, religion, gender. The ones that expose the myth." I stepped inside. The room was small, filled with filing cabinets and a single desk. A dust-covered lamp cast a yellow glow across the space. "This is what you wanted to show me?" I asked. "The ugly history of your own institution?" "No." She turned to face me. "I wanted to show you that I know my legacy is flawed. I know the name on the library comes from people who excluded others. I know I was born into a system that was never meant for someone like you. And I want you to understand," she paused, searching for words, "that I don't want to be that system. I want to be something different." The snow started at 9. By 10, the power flickered, a brief dimming of the lamp, followed by a surge that brought it back. By 11, the entire city went dark. I was in the basement archive when it happened, retrieving a file Sloane had requested about the building's original construction. The iron fire doors slammed shut automatically when the emergency system engaged. Heavy, ancient doors designed to contain fires in the 19th century, before sprinklers and alarms. I heard the thud from both ends of the corridor, sealing me in. And then I heard footsteps. "Don't panic." Sloane's voice came from behind a row of metal shelves, soft and steady. She emerged with a flashlight, a small, compact one, probably kept in her clutch for emergencies, the only light source in the room. Her gown was impractical for basements, but she had hiked up the hem, revealing black boots underneath. You followed me down here? I asked. I saw you go down. Then the doors shut. I came to check. You came to trap us together. She didn't deny it. She simply sat down against the concrete wall, the flashlight pointing at the ceiling, casting a pale circle on the stone above. We'll be here until morning, she said. The generators are manual. No one will come for us until the storm passes. The museum staff are all at the gala. They won't check the basements until the power comes back on. I sat across from her, keeping distance. The basement was cold, the concrete floor leaching warmth through my dress. I wrapped my arms around my knees, shivering. For a long time we said nothing. The flashlight illuminated dust motes floating in the air, and the sound of the storm filtered through the thick walls, a low howl, muffled but persistent. Then she spoke again, softer, as if the darkness had loosened something in her throat. Do you know why I keep that scrapbook? I shook my head, then realized she couldn't see it. No. 3 years ago, I started reading applications. Not for the council, just for myself. I wanted to see who was coming in. I read every single file. Every essay, every recommendation, every extracurricular list. And I realized something. She paused. Most people are predictable. They write what they think we want to read. They have the same dreams, the same fears, the same carefully curated stories about overcoming adversity. It was boring. She shifted, the sound of her gown rustling against the concrete. Then I found yours. Your essay wasn't about success. It wasn't about ambition or achievement. It was about invisibility. You wrote about how you learned to move through rooms without being noticed. How you found safety in being overlooked. How you taught yourself to become a ghost, because that was the only way to survive. She laughed, a small, brittle sound. And I read it 3 times. Why? Because it was honest. It was the only honest thing I'd read in 3,000 applications. Her voice grew quieter. I've spent my whole life being seen. Every room I enter, people watch me. They expect something. They want a smile, a handshake, a speech. They want me to be the person my family built me to be. And I perform. I perform so well that no one ever asks who I am underneath. She clicked the flashlight off. The room went pitch black, the kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're floating, disconnected from your own body. But I never wondered what it would be like to want to be unseen. Not until I read your words. And then I started thinking about you. About what it must feel like to walk through the world and have no one look at you. And I realized, she stopped, took a breath, that I was jealous. Jealous that you could choose to disappear. Because I've never had that choice. I listened, my heart beating slow and loud in my ears. She had never spoken this much before, never let the mask slip this far. I didn't start tracking you to harm you, she said into the darkness. I started because I needed to understand. I needed to know how a person could survive without being looked at. And then I started to worry. I saw you walk alone at night, through the quad, past the library. I saw the way Professor Vance looked at you during office hours. I saw his hand on your shoulder when he thought no one was watching. My stomach turned. What are you talking about? He had a pattern. Female students. Quiet ones. Vulnerable ones. He would offer extra credit for private meetings, late-night sessions in his office. I had him removed from the syllabus after I found the recordings. Recordings? Hidden cameras in his office. I found them during an inspection. I reported him to the ethics board with proof. He resigned quietly, no scandal, no fuss. No one knows it was me. Her voice was flat, clinical, the mask back in place. And no one, especially you, will ever have to know the full extent of what he planned. I felt the air leave my lungs. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides. You did that for me? I did it because you are not a piece of furniture. Her voice trembled, barely, but I caught it. You are the only thing I've ever wanted to protect. The only thing that felt worth protecting. Silence stretched between us. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. Then I heard her shift, heard the rustle of her gown as she moved closer in the dark. You don't have to love me, she whispered. Her hand found mine in the darkness, fingers cold but steady. Just let me keep you safe. That's all I ask. I could feel her breath on my cheek. In that darkness, there was no audience, no performance, no legacy or scholarship or coffee-stained blazer. Just two people who had spent their lives pretending, one to be invisible, one to be flawless, and both of them exhausted by the effort. I leaned in. Kiss was soft, uncertain, like the first step onto ice. Her lips were cold, but they softened when I pressed closer. She made a small sound, a release of tension, like a knot finally loosening. Her free hand came up to touch my face, cupping my jaw, holding me like I was something fragile. When we pulled apart, I heard her laugh. A quiet, broken laugh that seemed to surprise even her. I didn't plan that, she said. Neither did I. I touched my lips, still tasting the faint trace of her. But I'm not sorry. She was silent for a moment. Then she turned the flashlight back on, illuminating her face from below, making her look younger, almost fragile. Good, she said. Because I'm not either. Chapter 4, The Claiming. The winter market appeared on the main square the week before finals. Wooden stalls selling mulled cider, hand-knitted scarves, and cheap ornaments shaped like snowflakes and reindeer. The square had been transformed overnight, strung with fairy lights that twinkled against the gray December sky. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, and the sound of holiday music drifted from a speaker near the fountain. I went with Theo, the photography major from my high school, because he had asked twice and I had run out of excuses. He was harmless, that was the problem. He talked about aperture settings and his dog back home and his plans to travel to Iceland after graduation, and I nodded and smiled and bought a cup of cider just to have something to hold. But my eyes kept scanning the crowd. Sloane was not supposed to be there. She had a council meeting that night. I had seen it on her calendar, a 3-hour block labeled budget review. She had canceled our weekly check-in because of it. She would not be at the winter market. And yet, I saw her before Theo did. She was standing by a stall near the edge of the square, her hands in the pockets of a long camel coat, her hair loose in the wind. She was looking directly at me, not pretending to look at something else, not glancing around to seem casual, just watching with the same focused intensity she always wore. Theo noticed. Your friend. Not exactly. Ex-girlfriend? He laughed, a little nervously. She's staring pretty hard. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. She's obsessed with me. She's the most dangerous person I've ever met. She saved me from a predator and tracked my every move and kissed me in the dark, and I can't stop thinking about it. Sloane reached us just as Theo was about to ask me to the New Year's formal. He had opened his mouth, probably with some line about free champagne and dancing, but she interrupted. She's not going with you. Her voice cut through the winter air like a blade. Theo blinked, his mouth still half open. Excuse me, he said. Sloane stepped closer. The fairy lights glinted off the chain at her neck. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, navy blue, the kind that held jewelry or medals. She opened it with a click. Inside lay the presidential gold key, the same medal awarded to the top graduating senior each year, the one that came with a $1,000 prize and a permanent plaque in the alumni hall. It was solid, heavy, engraved with the university crest and the words excellence in leadership. She lifted it and clasped it around my neck. Her fingers brushed my collarbone, warm despite the cold. "She's going with the Dean's List top honoree," she said, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "That's me." Theo's face went red, a blotchy, furious red that spread from his neck to his ears. "You can't just—" "I can." Sloane turned to me, her eyes locking mine. "Iris." "Tell him." I should have said no. I should have unclasped the key and handed it back and walked away from both of them, back to my dorm, back to my gray cardigan and my invisibility. But the weight of the key against my chest, cold gold, heavy with meaning, felt like something I had been missing without knowing. I looked at Theo. He was waiting, his expression caught between hurt and anger. He had been kind to me. He had never asked for anything. He had simply assumed that I would say yes because I had no reason to say no. But I did have a reason. And she was standing in front of me, holding my gaze, her eyes saying everything her mouth wouldn't. "I'm sorry, Theo," I heard myself say. "I already have plans." He left, muttering something about entitled rich girls and their toys. Crowd dispersed, returning to their cider and their scarves. Sloane stepped closer and adjusted the key on my necklace, her fingers brushing my throat. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know." She smiled, that small, sad smile again. "But I wanted everyone to see. You are not invisible anymore, Iris. You are mine." She said it with such finality that I should have felt trapped. I should have felt the walls closing in, the cage door swinging shut. Instead, I felt something else, a thrill sharp and electric, like the first time I realized that being seen did not have to mean being consumed. "That was possessive," I said. "Yes. And manipulative." "Absolutely. And I didn't hate it." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I know. That's what scares you most." She was right. Terrified me. But it also thrilled me. And that was the scariest part of all. Chapter 5, Move in Symbiosis. The lease agreement sat on her coffee table for 3 days. Sloane's apartment was on the 5th floor of a building overlooking the frozen river, one of those old brownstones that had been converted into luxury units, with original crown molding and restored hardwood floors. The space was minimalist in a way that felt deliberate rather than empty. White walls, gray furniture, a single bookshelf that held only the scrapbook and a few classics. No family photos. No personal artifacts. No trace of the dynasty that had built the university. She had given me the key a week earlier. A simple brass key on a plain ring, unmarked, unremarkable. She had set it beside the lease and said, "The cage door is open, Iris. If you walk out, I'll go back to just watching from the window. But if you stay, I'm never letting go." I had taken the key. I had held it in my palm, feeling its weight, its coldness. Then I had left it on my own desk in my dorm room, among my textbooks and my coffee-stained notes. For 3 nights I did not sleep. I replayed every moment, the coffee, the scrapbook, the dark archive, the gold key around my neck. I replayed her voice, "You are not invisible anymore." I replayed my own response, I didn't hate it. I replayed the kiss in the basement, the feel of her hand on my face, the broken laugh that had escaped her. On the 4th night, a blizzard hit. The wind howled against the windows of my dorm, rattling the frames, and the radiator clanked and hissed like a dying animal. The room felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in. My roommate, Priya, was at her boyfriend's place, and I was alone with the snow and the dark and the key on my desk. I sat on my bed for an hour, staring at it. Then I stood up and walked across the room. I picked it up. It was cold in my palm, cold like her fingers. I thought about all the years I had spent shrinking, choosing gray clothes, walking against walls, never raising my hand in class, never attending parties, never speaking to anyone unless absolutely necessary. I had built my entire identity around not being seen, around making myself small enough to slip through the cracks. I had told myself it was safety. I had told myself it was freedom. And then Sloane had looked at me, truly looked, and I had discovered that invisibility was not safety. It was just a different kind of cage. A cage with no walls, no bars, no visible boundaries, but a cage nonetheless. A cage where I was trapped by my own fear of being noticed. I put on my boots. I grabbed my coat. I walked out the door. The snow was deep, up to my ankles, and the streets were empty. The university had shut down, classes canceled, buildings locked, students huddled in their dorms. I was the only person outside, my boots leaving deep prints in the fresh powder. Cold bit at my cheeks, and my breath came in clouds, and I did not look back. Her building was dark except for her floor, a single rectangle of light on the 5th story, glowing like a beacon. I pressed the buzzer. The intercom crackled. "Who is it?" "It's me." A long pause. Then the buzzer unlocked. I took the stairs because I hated elevators and climbed to the 5th floor. Each landing was silent, the steps creaking under my weight. When I reached her door, it was already open. She stood in the frame, wearing a worn gray sweater, her glasses off, her hair messy and unwashed. She looked human. She looked terrified. "You came back," she whispered. "You left the door open. I always leave it open for you." She stepped aside. I walked in. The apartment was warm, the heating system humming softly. The scrapbook sat open on the coffee table, turned to a new page, a photograph of me from the winter market wearing the gold key, laughing at something Theo had said. I had not even realized I was laughing. "When did you take that?" I asked. "The moment you said yes to Theo." She closed the door behind me, the lock clicking into place. "I knew you would come here eventually. You just needed to decide on your own." I turned to face her. Key to her apartment was still in my coat pocket, but I realized I did not need it anymore. She had opened the door herself. She had been waiting, the same way she had been waiting since the moment I spilled coffee on her blazer. "I'm not a variable anymore," I said. "No." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. "You're the equation. The only one that makes sense." I reached out and took her hand, not because she asked, but because I wanted to. Her fingers were cold, but they curled around mine like they had been waiting. "I don't know if this is healthy," I said. "It's not. I don't know if I can trust you." "You shouldn't. But I'm still here." She brought my hand to her lips and kissed my knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned, so deliberate that I felt my heart crack open. "That's all I need," she said. "Just stay." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside, the heating hummed, and the cedar scent of her skin filled my lungs. I looked at the scrapbook on the table, at my own face in that photograph, laughing. I looked at the key on her desk, the one she had given me, the one I had left behind. I looked at her. She was not perfect. She was not safe. She was not the golden girl the portraits painted. She was something else, something broken and hungry and desperate. And she had chosen me. That was the weight of her gaze. Not a burden, but a promise. A promise that I would never have to disappear again. I stepped forward. I wrapped my arms around her. She stiffened for a moment, then melted into the embrace, her face pressed against my shoulder. "Stay," she whispered again. "I'm here," I said. "I'm staying." And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally been found. Chapter 6: The New Equilibrium. The first week after I moved in, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I woke up each morning in her bed, not mine, because she had insisted I sleep there while she took the couch, a concession that lasted exactly 2 nights before she started appearing at the foot of the mattress at 3 in the morning, asking in a small voice if she could please come in. I said yes. I kept saying yes. By the end of the first week, the couch had become a repository for her books and my laundry, and the bed had become ours. I waited for the moment when the control would become suffocating. When she would dictate what I wore, what I ate, who I spoke to. When the scrapbook would expand to include my every conversation, my every email, my every movement through the day. I had braced myself for it, the way you brace yourself for the cold plunge of a pool. But it didn't come. Or rather, it came in ways I hadn't anticipated. She made breakfast. Every morning without fail. The first time I stumbled into the kitchen, still bleary-eyed and wrapped in one of her oversized sweaters, she was already at the stove, spatula in hand, the smell of eggs and toast filling the apartment. She turned and looked at me, a quick, assessing glance, and then slid a plate onto the counter. "Oat milk in your coffee," she said. "Single egg over easy. Toast with butter, not jam. You had jam yesterday and you made a face." I blinked. "I made a face?" "You did. A small one. You thought I didn't notice." I stared at the plate. Coffee was the exact shade I liked, pale brown, not too dark. The egg was perfectly cooked, the edges crisp. Toast was buttered to the edges, no dry patches. "How do you do that?" I asked. "Do what?" "Know what I want before I know it myself." She set down her own plate, black coffee, no food, and sat across from me. "Because I watch. I've always watched. It's not a choice, Iris. It's just what I do." I took a bite of the toast. It was perfect. Of course it was perfect. "I used to think it was surveillance," I said, chewing. "Now I think it's just obsessive attention to detail." She tilted her head. "Those aren't different things." "Maybe." I swallowed. "But the intention matters." She didn't answer. She just watched me eat, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes tracking every movement I made. That was the first thing I learned about living with Sloane. She never stopped watching. The gaze that had once terrified me was now a constant presence, a companion I had learned to coexist with. It wasn't hostile anymore. It had stopped feeling like a threat somewhere between the basement and the winter market, but it was still there. A pressure on my skin, a weight on my consciousness. The second thing I learned, she had a schedule for everything. Not a written one, not a physical planner, but an internal clock that ran her life with mechanical precision. She woke at 6. She ran for 45 minutes on the treadmill because she hated the cold while I slept in. She showered at 7. She made coffee at 7:15. She sat at her desk by 8, and she worked until noon with only a single 15-minute break to check her phone and presumably to make sure I was still alive. In the afternoon, she was more flexible. She would close her laptop and join me on the couch, or she would ask me about my classes, or she would simply sit beside me and read while I studied. The silence between us was comfortable now, not charged with tension. She had stopped asking about my schedule. She already knew it, and I had stopped flinching when she mentioned things she shouldn't have known. "Your mother called yesterday," she said one afternoon without looking up from her book. I froze. "How do you know that?" "She called your phone while you were in the shower." "Caller ID," said Mom. I didn't answer it. I stared at her. You didn't mention it until now. I was waiting for you to tell me. She set down the book. You didn't. I opened my mouth to explain, to say that my mother called every week, that her health was declining, that I didn't like talking about it because it made me feel helpless and small, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, I don't want you to know about her. She was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. I already know she's sick, she said quietly. I've known since I read your emergency contact form. I know she has a chronic condition that's getting worse. I know you send half your paycheck home every month. I know you haven't told her about me. I felt something tighten in my chest. And you didn't bring it up until now. Because it's yours to bring up. She moved closer, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. I'll never stop watching, Heiress. But I can learn when to look away. I didn't know what to say to that. So I leaned into her touch and she pulled me into an embrace, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was being claimed. I felt like I was being held. But the tension didn't disappear entirely. It surfaced in small ways. In the way she would check my phone when I left it on the counter, not secretly but openly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In the way she would ask where I was going when I put on my coat, even if I had already told her. In the way her fingers would tighten on my arm when someone else looked at me for too long. One evening I came back from class and found Theo's name in her search history. She was sitting at her desk, the laptop open, and I caught a glimpse of the screen as I walked past. Query had been typed and deleted. The trace was still there, visible in the autofill. Theo Chen Photography Ashworth. I stopped. You searched for him. She didn't flinch. I wanted to see if he'd been posting about you. Posting about me? Photographs. Social media. Anything that might have captured you without your consent. She closed the laptop. He takes pictures of everything. I needed to make sure he wasn't taking pictures of you. Because that's your job now? To monitor everyone who might look at me. She stood up, turning to face me. Her eyes were steady, unyielding. Yes, that is exactly what I do. I don't expect you to like it. But I'm not going to apologize for it. I felt the familiar rush of frustration, the same feeling I'd had in the glass-walled office, the same impulse to slam the scrapbook shut and walk out. But I also felt something else. Something quieter. Something that whispered, she's not doing this to control you. She's doing it because she's scared. Did you find anything? I asked. She blinked. What? Did he post about me? Does he have photos? She paused, clearly thrown off by the question. No. Not that I could find. Good. I walked over to her and took her hand. Next time, just tell me. Don't search behind my back. I wasn't. I know you weren't hiding it. I saw the screen. I squeezed her fingers. But I'm here. I'm with you. You don't have to gather intel anymore. I'll tell you what you need to know. She looked down at our joined hands. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. That's not how I work. I know. But you can learn. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. I'll try, she said. The snow had melted by the end of January, replaced by a gray, drizzly cold that seeped through the walls and made the apartment feel perpetually damp. We spent most of our weekends inside, reading or watching old movies on her laptop, huddled together under a thick blanket that she had bought specifically because she noticed I got cold easily. I had stopped wearing gray. It wasn't a conscious decision. I had simply run out of gray things to wear, and Sloane had taken me shopping, and she had put a green sweater in my hands and said, "This one." I had bought it. I wore it often. She always smiled when she saw it. One Saturday morning I woke up before her, an unusual occurrence. She was still asleep, her face pressed into the pillow, her hair a mess of tangles across the white cotton. Without her glasses, without the tight bun, without the structured blazers, she looked younger. Not fragile, nothing about Sloane was fragile, but softened. Less like a portrait and more like a person. I watched her for a few minutes. Then I got up and walked to the kitchen. I made coffee. Milk, 2 sugars, just the way she always made it for me. I scrambled eggs, not perfectly, they came out a little dry, a little brown at the edges, and I set the table with the plate she had bought the week before, the one she had chosen because I mentioned I liked the color. When she walked into the kitchen, still rubbing her eyes, she stopped in the doorway. "What's this?" "Breakfast," I said. "I made it for you." She stared at the plates. Then she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I've never had anyone make me breakfast before," she said. "Not even your family?" "They paid someone to make breakfast." She walked closer, her bare feet silent on the floor. "They didn't make it themselves." I pulled out a chair for her. "Sit." "It's not perfect, but it's edible." She sat. She took a bite of the eggs, chewed slowly, and I watched her face for any sign of displeasure. She didn't frown. She didn't smile either. But she took another bite, and then another, and when she finished, she set down the fork and looked at me with those unblinking eyes. "I don't know how to be this," she said. "This normal?" "Neither do I. But I want to learn." She reached across the table and took my hand. "For you." I turned my hand over, interlacing my fingers with hers. The weight of her gaze was still there, it would always be there, but it had changed. It was no longer the weight of surveillance. It was the weight of attention, of focus, of someone who had chosen to look at me not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Then we'll learn together," I said. She smiled. A real smile, not the sad one, not the controlled one. It lit up her face in a way I had never seen before. "Okay," she said. "Together." And for the first time I believed her.